The Horse and His Boy by C.S. Lewis. It's a map of Archenland. Looks like a lot of desert. Chapter 1. How Shasta set out on his travels. This is the story of an adventure that happened in Narnia and Kellerman and the lands between in the Golden Age, when Peter was High King in Narnia and his brother and two sisters were king and queens under him. In those days, far south in Kellerman, on a little creek of the sea, there lived a poor fisherman called Arshish, and with him there lived a boy who called him Father. The boy's name was Shasta. On most days, Arshish went out in his boat to fish in the morning, and in the afternoon he harnessed his donkey to a cart and loaded the cart with fish, and went a mile or so southward to the village to sell it. If it had sold well, he would come home in a moderately good temper and say nothing to Shasta. But if it had sold badly, he would find fault with him and perhaps beat him. There was always something to find fault with, for Shasta had plenty of work to do, mending and washing the nets, cooking the supper, and cleaning the cottage in which they both lived. Shasta was not at all interested in anything that lay south of his home, because he had once or twice been to the village with Arshish, and he knew that there was nothing very interesting there. In the village he only met other men who were just like his father, men with long, dirty robes and wooden shoes turned up at the toe, and turbans on their heads, and beards, talking to one another very slowly about things that sounded dull. But he was very interested in everything that lay to the north, because no one ever went that way, and he was never allowed to go there himself. When he was sitting out of doors mending the nets, and all alone, he would often look eagerly to the north. One could see nothing but a grassy slope running up to a level ridge, and beyond that the sky with perhaps a few birds in it. Sometimes, if Arshish was there, Shasta would say, "Oh, my father, what is there beyond the hill?" And then, if the fisherman was in a bad temper, he would box Shasta's ears and tell him to attend to his work. Or if he was in a peaceable mood, he would say, "Oh, my son, do not allow your mind to be distracted by idle questions." For one of the poets has said, "Application to business is the root of prosperity, but those who ask questions that do not concern them are steering the ship of folly towards the rock of indigence." Shasta thought that beyond the hill there must be some delightful secret which his father wished to hide from him. In reality, however, the fisherman talked like this because he didn't know what lay to the north. Neither did he care. He had a very practical mind. One day there came from the south a stranger who was unlike any man that Shasta had seen before. He rode upon a strong dappled horse with flowing mane and tail, and his stirrups and bridle were inlaid with silver. The spike of a helmet projected from the middle of his silken turban, and he wore a shirt of chain mail. By his side hung a curving scimitar, a round shield studded with bosses of brass hung at his back, and his right hand grasped lance. His face was dark, but this did not surprise Shasta, because all the people of Calormen were like that. What did surprise him was the man's beard, which was dyed crimson, and curled and gleaming with scented oil. But Arshish knew by the gold on the stranger's bare arm that he was a Tarkan, or great lord, and he bowed, kneeling before him till his beard touched the earth, and made signs to Shasta to kneel also. The stranger demanded hospitality for the night, which of course the fisherman dared not refuse. All the best they had was set before the Tarkan for supper, and he didn't much of it, and Shasta, as always happened, and Shasta, as always happened when the fisherman had company, was given a hunk of bread and turned out to the cottage. On these occasions, he usually slept with the donkey in his little thatched stable. But it was much too early to go to sleep yet, and Shasta, who had never learned that it is wrong to listen behind doors, sat down with his ear to a crack in the wooden wall of the cottage to hear what the grown-ups were talking about. And this is what he heard. "And now, O my host," said the Tarkin, "I have a mind to buy that boy of yours." "Oh, my master," replied the fisherman. Shasta knew by the wheedling tone, the greedy look, that was probably coming into his face as he said it. "What price could induce your servant, poor though he is, to sell into slavery his only child and his own flesh? Has not one of the poets said, 'Natural affection is stronger than soup, and offspring more precious than carbuncles'?" "It is even so," replied the guest dryly. "But another poet has likewise said, 'He who attempts to deceive the judicious is already bearing his own back for the scourge.' Do not load your aged mouth with falsehoods. This boy is manifestly no son of yours, for your cheek is as black as mine, but the boy is fair and white like the accursed but beautiful barbarians who inhabit the remote north." "How well it is said," answered the fisherman, "that swords can be kept off with shields, but the eye of wisdom pierces through every defense. Know then, O my formidable guest, that because of my extreme poverty, I have never married and have no child. But in that same year in which that Israk, may he live forever, began his august and beneficent reign, on a night when the moon was at her full, it pleased the gods to deprive me of my sleep. Therefore I arose from my bed in this hovel and went forth to the beach to refresh myself with looking upon the water and the moon and breathing the cool air. And presently I heard a noise as of oars coming to me across the water, and then, as it were, a weak cry. And shortly after, the tide brought to the land a little boat, in which there was nothing but a man lean with extreme hunger and thirst, who seemed to have died but a few moments before, for he was still warm, and an empty water skin, and a child still living. Doubtless, said I, it is unfortunate to have escaped from the wreck of a great ship. By the admirable designs of the gods, the elder has starved himself to keep the child alive and has perished in sight of land. Accordingly, remembering how the gods never fail to reward those who befriend the destitute, and being moved by compassion, for your servant is a man of tender heart. Leave out all these idle words in your own praise, interrupted the Tarkin. It is enough to know that you took the child, and have had 10 times the worth of his daily bread out of him in labor, as anyone can see. And now tell me at once what price you put on him, for I am wearied with your loquacity. You yourself have wisely said, answered Arshish, that the boy's labor has been to me of inestimable value. This must be taken into account in fixing the price. For if I sell the boy, I must undoubtedly either buy or hire another to do his work. I'll give you 15 crescents for him, said Tartan. 15! cried Arshish in a voice that was something between a whine and a scream. 15! You're the prop of my old age and the delight of my eyes. Do not mock my gray beard. Hearken though you may be, my price, 70. At this point, Shasta got up and tiptoed away. He had heard all he wanted, for he had often listened when men were bargaining in the village, and knew how it was done. He was quite certain that Arshish would sell him in the end for something much more than 15 crescents and much less than 70, but that he and Tarquin would take hours in getting to an agreement. You must not imagine that Shasta felt at all as you and I would feel if we had just overheard our parents talking about selling us for slaves. For one thing, his life was already little better than slavery. For all he knew, the lordly stranger on the great horse might be kinder to him than Arshish. For another, the story about his own discovery in the book filled him with excitement and with a sense of relief. He had often been uneasy because, try as he might, he had never been able to love the fisherman, and he knew that a boy ought to love his father. And now, apparently, he was no relation to Arshish at all. That took a great weight off his mind. Why, it might be anyone, he thought. I may be the son of a Tarkin myself, or the son of the Tisrak, may he live forever, or of a god. He was standing out in the grassy place before the cottage while he thought these things. Twilight was coming on apace, and a star or two was already out, but the remains of the sunset could still be seen in the west. Not far away, the stranger's horse, loosely tied to an iron ring in the wall of the donkey's stable, was grazing. Shasta strolled over to it and patted its neck. It went on tearing up the grass and took no notice of him. Then another thought came into Shasta's mind. I wonder what sort of a man that Tarkin is, he said out loud. It would be splendid if he was kind. Some of the slaves in a great lord's house have next to nothing to do. They wear lovely clothes and eat meat every day. Perhaps he'd take me to the wars, and I'd save his life in a battle, and then he'd set me free and adopt me as his son, and give me a palace and a chariot and a suit of armor. But then he might be a horrid, cruel man. He might send me to work on the field in chains. I wish I knew. How can I know? I bet this horse knows. If only he could tell me. The horse had lifted its head. Shasta stroked its smooth as satin nose and said, I wish you could talk, old fellow. And then, for a second, he thought he was dreaming, but quite distinctly, though in a low voice, the horse said, But I can. Shasta stared into its great eyes, and his own grew almost as big with astonishment. However did you learn to talk? Hush, not so loud, replied the horse. Where I come from, nearly all the animals talk. Wherever is that? Asked Shasta. Narnia, answered the horse. The happy land of Narnia. Narnia of the heathery mountains and the thymy downs. Narnia of the many rivers and flashing glens, the mossy caverns, and the deep forests ringing with the hammers of the dwarfs. Oh, the sweet air of Narnia. An hour's life there is better than 1,000 years in Calormen. It ended with a whinny that sounded very like a sigh. How did you get here? Said Shasta. Kidnapped, said the horse, or stolen, or captured, whichever you like to call it. I was only a foal at the time. My mother warned me not to range the southern slopes into Archenland and beyond, but I wouldn't heed her. And by the lion's mane, I've paid for my fault. All these years I've been a slave to humans, hiding my true nature and pretending to be dumb and witless like their horses. Why didn't you tell them who you were? Not such a fool, that's why. If they'd found out I could talk, they would have made a show of me at fairs and guarded me more carefully than ever. My last chance of escape would have been gone. And why? Began Shasta, but the horse interrupted him. Now look, it said, we mustn't waste our time on idle questions. You want to know about my master, the Tarkin Anradin. Well, he's bad. Not too bad to me, for a war horse costs too much to be treated very bad. But you'd be better lying dead tonight than go to be a human slave in his house tomorrow. Then I'd better run away, said Shasta, turning very pale. Yes, you had, said the horse. But why not run away with me? Are you going to run away too? Said Shasta. Yes, if you'll come with me, answered the horse. This is a chance for both of us. You see, if I run away without a rider, everyone who sees me will say, "Stray horse," and be after me as quick as he can. With a rider, I've a chance to get through. That's where you can help me. On the other hand, you can't get very far on those two silly legs of yours. What absurd legs humans have, without being overtaken. But on me, you can outdistance any other horse in this country. That's where I can help you. By the way, I suppose you know how to ride. Oh, yes, of course, said Shasta. At least I've ridden a donkey. Ridden the what? Retorted the horse with extreme contempt. At least that is what he meant. Actually, it came out in a sort of neigh. Ridden the talking horses always become more horsey in accent when they are angry. In other words, he continued, you can't ride. That's a drawback. I'll have to teach you as we go along. If you can't ride, then you fall. I suppose anyone can fall, said Shasta. I mean, can you fall and get up again without crying, and mount again and fall again, and yet not be afraid of falling? I'll try, said Shasta. Poor little beast, said the horse in a gentler tone. I forget you're only a foal. We'll make a fine rider of you in time. And now we mustn't start until those two in the hut are asleep. Meantime, we can make our plans. My Tarkin is on his way north to the great city, Ashbon itself, and the court of the Tisroc. I say, in Shasta in a rather shocked voice, oughtn't you to say, may he live forever? Why? Asked the horse. I'm a free Narnian, and why should I talk slaves and fools talk? I don't want him to live forever, and I know that he's not going to live forever, whether I want him to or not. And I can see you're from the free north, too. No more of this southern jargon between you and me. And now, back to our plan. As I said, my human was on his way north to Tashbaan. Does that mean we'd better go to the south? I think not, said the horse. You see, he thinks I'm dumb and witless like his other horses. Now, if I really were, the moment I got loose, I'd go back home to my stable and paddock, back to his palace, which is 2 days' journey south. That's where he'll look for me. He'd never dream of my going on north on my own. And anyway, he'll probably think someone in the last village who saw him ride through has followed us to here and stolen me. Oh, hooray, said Shasta. We'll go north. I've been longing to go to the north all my life. Of course you have, said the horse. That's because of the blood that's in you. I'm sure you're true northern stock, but not too loud. I should think they'd be asleep soon now. I'd better creep back and see, suggested Shasta. That's a good idea, said the horse, but take care you're not caught. It was a good deal darker now, and very silent except for the sound of the waves on the beach, which Shasta hardly noticed because he had been hearing it day and night as long as he could remember. The cottage, as he approached it, showed no light. When he listened at the front, there was no noise. When he went round to the only window, he could hear, after a second or two, the familiar noise of the old fisherman's squeaky snore. It was funny to think that if all went well, he could never hear it again. holding his breath and feeling a little bit sorry, but much less sorry than he was glad. Shasta glided away over the grass and went to the donkey's stable, groped along to a place he knew where the key was hidden, opened the door, and found the horse's saddle, bridle, which had been locked up there for the night. He bent forward and kissed the donkey's nose. "I'm sorry we can't take you," he said. "There you are at last," said the horse when he got back to it. "I was beginning to wonder what had become of you." "I was getting your things out of the stable," replied Shasta. "And now, can you tell me how to put them on?" The next few minutes Shasta was at work, very cautiously to avoid jingling, while the horse said things like, "Get that girth a bit tighter," or "You'll find a buckle lower down," or "You'll need to shorten those stirrups a good bit." When all was finished, he said, "Now, we've got to have reins for the look of the thing, but you won't be using them. Tie them to the saddlebow, very slack so that I can do what I like with my head. And remember, you are not to touch them." "What are they for then?" asked Shasta. "Ordinarily, they are for directing me," replied the horse. "But as I intend to do all the directing on this journey, you'll please keep your hands to yourself. And there's another. I'm not going to have you grabbing my mane." "I say," pleaded Shasta, "if I'm not to hold on by the reins or by your mane, what am I to hold on by?" "You hold on with your knees," said the horse. "That's the secret of good riding. Grip my body between your knees as hard as you like. Sit straight up, straight as a poker. Keep your elbows in. And by the way, what did you do with the spurs?" "Put them on my heels, of course," said Shasta. "I do know that much." "Then you can take them off and put them in the saddlebag. We may be able to sell them when we get to Tashbaan. Ready? And now I think you can get up." "Oh, you're a dreadful height," gasped Shasta after his first and unsuccessful attempt. "I'm a horse, that's all," was the reply. "Anyone would think I was a haystack from the way you're trying to climb up me. There, that's better. Now sit up and remember what I told you about your knees. Funny to think of me, who has led cavalry charges and won races, having a potato sack like you in the saddle. However, off we go." He chuckled, not unkindly. And he certainly began their night journey with great caution. First of all, he went just south of the fisherman's cottage to the little river which there ran into the sea, and took care to leave in the mud some very plain hoof markings pointing south. But as soon as they were in the middle of the ford, he turned upstream and waited until they were about 100 yards further inland than the cottage. Then he selected a nice gravelly bit of bank, which would take no footprints, and came out on the northern side. Then, still at a walking pace, he went northward till the cottage, the one tree, the donkey's stable, and the creek, everything, in fact, that Shasta had ever known, had sunk out of sight in the gray summer night darkness. They had been going uphill, and now were at the top of the ridge, that ridge which had always been the boundary of Shasta's known world. He could not see what was ahead, except that it was all open and grassy. It looked endless, wild and lonely and free. "I say," observed the horse, "what a place for a gallop, eh?" "Oh, don't let's," said Shasta. "Not yet. I don't know how to. Please, horse, I don't know your name." "Rinny, brinny, hoo-ha," said the horse. "I'll never be able to say that," said Shasta. "Can I call you Bree?" "Well, if that's the best you can do, I suppose you must," said the horse. "And what shall I call you?" "I'm called Shasta." Said Bree. "Well, now, there's a name that's really hard to pronounce. But now about this gallop. It's a good deal easier than trotting if you only knew, because you don't have to rise and fall. Grip with your knees and keep your eyes straight ahead between my ears. Don't look at the ground. If you think you're going to fall, just grip harder and sit up straighter. Ready? Now, for Narnia and the North. Chapter 2, The Wayside Adventure. It was nearly noon on the following day when Shasta was wakened by something warm and soft moving over his face. He opened his eyes and found himself staring into the long face of a horse. Its nose and lips were almost touching his. He remembered the exciting events of the previous night and sat up, but as he did so, he groaned. "Oh, oh, Bree," he gasped. "I'm so sore, all over. I can hardly move." "Good morning, small one," said Bree. "I was afraid you might feel a bit stiff. It can't be the falls. You didn't have more than a dozen or so, and it was all lovely, soft, springy turf. Must have been almost a pleasure to fall on. And the only one that might have been nasty was broken by that gorse bush. No, it's the riding itself that comes hard at first. What about breakfast? I've had mine." "Oh, bother breakfast. Bother everything," said Shasta. "I tell you, I can't move." But the horse nuzzled at him with his nose and pawed him gently with a hoof till he had to get up. And then he looked about him and saw where they were. Behind them lay a little copse. Before them the turf, dotted with white flowers, sloped down to the brow of a cliff. Far below them, so that the sound of the breaking waves was very faint, lay the sea. Shasta had never seen it from such a height, and never seen so much of it before, nor dreamed how many colors it had. On either hand the coast stretched away, headland after headland, and at the points you could see the white foam running up the rocks but making no noise because it was so far off. There were gulls flying overhead, and the heat shivered on the ground. It was a blazing day. But what Shasta chiefly noticed was the air. He couldn't think what was missing until at last he realized that there was no smell of fish in it. For of course, neither in the cottage nor among the nets had he ever been away from that smell in his life. And this new air was so delicious, and all his old life seemed so far away, that he forgot for a moment about his bruises and his aching muscles, and said, "I say, Bree, didn't you say something about breakfast?" "Yes, I did," answered Bree. "I think you'll find something in the saddlebags. They're over there on that tree where you hung them up last night, or early this morning, rather." They investigated the saddlebags, and the results were cheering. A meat pasty, only slightly stale, a lump of dried fig, and another lump of green cheese, a little flask of wine, and some money, about 40 crescents in all, which was more than Shasta had ever seen. While Shasta sat down, painfully and cautiously, with his back against a tree, and started on the pasty, Bree had a few more mouthfuls of grass to keep him company. "Won't it be stealing to use the money?" asked Shasta. "Oh," said the horse, looking up with his mouth full of grass. "I never thought of that. A free horse and a talking horse mustn't steal, of course. But I think it's all right. We're prisoners and captives in enemy country. That money is booty, spoil. Besides, how are we to get any food for you without it? I suppose, like all humans, you won't eat natural food like grass and oats." "I can't." "Ever tried?" "Yes, I have. I can't get it done at all. And you couldn't either, if you were me." "You're rum little creatures, you humans," remarked Bree. When Shasta had finished his breakfast, which was by far the nicest he had ever eaten, Bree said, "I think I'll have a nice roll before we put on that saddle again." And he proceeded to do so. "That's good. That's very good, he said, rubbing his back on the turf and waving all four legs in the air. You ought to have one too, Shasta, he snorted. It's most refreshing. But Shasta burst out laughing and said, You do look funny when you're on your back. I look nothing of the sort, said Bree. But then suddenly he rolled round on his side, raised his head, and looked hard at Shasta, blowing a little. Does it really look funny? He asked in an anxious voice. Yes, it does, replied Shasta. But what does it matter? You don't think, do you, said Bree, that it might be a thing talking horses never do? A silly, clownish trick I've learned from the dumb ones? It would be dreadful to find when I got back to Narnia that I've picked up a lot of low, bad habits. What do you think, Shasta? Honestly now, don't spare my feelings. Do you think the real free horses, the talking kind, roll? How should I know? Anyway, I don't think I should bother about it if I were you. We've got to get there first. Do you know the way? I know my way to Tashbaan. After that comes the desert. Oh, we'll manage the desert somehow, never fear. Why, we'll be inside of the northern mountains then. Think of it, Narnia and the north. Nothing will stop us then. But I'd be glad to be past Tashbaan. You and I are safer away from cities. Can't we avoid it? Not without going a long way inland. And that would take us into cultivated land and main roads. And I wouldn't know the way. No, we'll just have to creep along the coast. Up here on the downs, we'll meet nothing but sheep and rabbits and gulls and a few shepherds. And by the way, what about starting? Shasta's legs ached terribly as he saddled Bree and climbed into the saddle, but the horse was kindly to him and went at a soft pace all afternoon. When evening twilight came, they dropped by steep tracks into a valley and found a village. Before they got into it, Shasta dismounted and entered it on foot to buy a loaf and some onions and radishes. The horse trotted round by the fields in the dusk and met Shasta at the far side. This became their regular plan every second night. These were great days for Shasta, and every day better than the last as his muscles hardened and he fell less often. Even at the end of his training, Bree still said he sat like a bag of flour in the saddle. And even if it was safe, young'un, I'd be ashamed to be seen with you on the main road. But in spite of his rude words, Bree was a patient teacher. No one can teach riding so well as a horse. Shasta learned to trot, to canter, to jump, and to keep his seat even when Bree pulled up suddenly or swung unexpectedly to the left or the right, which, as Bree told him, was a thing you might have to do at any moment in a battle. And then, of course, Shasta begged to be told of the battles and wars in which Bree had carried the target, and Bree would tell of forced marches and the fording of swift rivers, of charges, and of fierce fights between cavalry when the war horses fought as well as the men, being all fierce stallions, trained to bite and kick, and to rear at the right moment so that the horses' weight as well as the riders would come down on an enemy's crest in the stroke of a sword or battle axe. But Bree did not want to talk about the wars as often as Shasta wanted to hear about them. Don't speak of them, youngster, he would say. They were only the Tisrock's war, and I fought in them as a slave and a dumb beast. Give me the Narnian wars where I shall fight as a free horse among my own people. Those will be wars worth talking about. Narnia and the North. Rah! Shasta soon learned, when he heard Bree talking like that, to prepare for a gallop. After they had traveled on for weeks and weeks, past more bays and headlands and rivers and villages than Shasta could remember, there came a moonlit night when they started their journey at evening, having slept during the day. had left the downs behind them and were crossing a wide plain with a forest about half a mile away on their left. The sea, hidden by low sandhills, was about the same distance on their right. They had jogged along for about an hour, sometimes trotting and sometimes walking, when Bree suddenly stopped. "Oh, what's up?" said Shasta. "Shh," said Bree, craning his neck round and twitching his ears. "Did you hear something? Listen." "It sounds like another horse between us and the wood," said Shasta, after he had listened for about a minute. "It is another horse," said Bree, "and that's what I don't like." "Isn't it probably just a farmer riding home late?" said Shasta with a yawn. "Don't tell me," said Bree. "That's not a farmer's riding, nor a farmer's horse either. Can't you tell by the sound? That's quality, that horse is, and it's being ridden by a real horseman. I tell you what it is, Shasta. There's a Tarkin under the edge of that wood. Not on his war horse, it's too light for that. On a fine blood mare, I should say." "Well, it's stopped now, whatever it is," said Shasta. "You're right," said Bree. "And why should he stop just when we do? Shasta, my boy, I do believe there's someone shadowing us at last." "What shall we do?" said Shasta in a lower whisper than before. "Do you think he can see us as well as hear us?" "Not in this light, so long as we stay quite still," answered Bree. "But look, there's a cloud coming up. I'll wait till that gets over the moon. Then we'll go off to our right as quietly as we can down to the shore. We can hide among the sandhills if the worst comes to the worst." They waited till the cloud covered the moon, and then, first at a walking pace, and afterwards at a gentle trot, made for the shore. The cloud was bigger and thicker than it had looked at first, and soon the night grew very dark. Just as Shasta was saying to himself, "We must be nearly at those sandhills by now," his heart leaped into his mouth because an appalling noise had suddenly risen up out of the darkness ahead. A long, snarling roar, melancholy and utterly savage. Instantly, Bree swerved round and began galloping inland again as fast as he could gallop. "What is it?" gasped Shasta. "Lions," said Bree, without checking his pace or turning his head. After that there was nothing but sheer galloping for some time. At last they splashed across a wide, shallow stream, and Bree came to a stop on the far side. Shasta noticed that he was trembling and sweating all over. "That water may have thrown the brute off our scent," panted Bree when he had partly got his breath again. "We can walk for a bit now." As they walked, Bree said, "Shasta, I'm ashamed of myself. I'm just as frightened as a common collar mean horse. I am really. I don't feel like a talking horse at all. I don't mind swords and lances and arrows, but I can't bear those creatures. I think I'll trot for a bit." About a minute later, however, he broke into a gallop again, and no wonder, for the roar broke out again, this time on their left from the direction of the forest. "Two of 'em," moaned Bree. When they had galloped for several minutes without any further noise from the lions, Shasta said, "I say, that other horse is galloping beside us now, only a stone's throw away." "All the better," panted Bree. "Tarkin on it. We'll have a sword. Protect us all." "But Bree," said Shasta, "we might just as well be killed by lions as caught, or I might. They'll hang me for horse stealing." He was feeling less frightened of lions than Bree because he had never met a lion. Bree had. Bree only snorted in answer, but he did sheer away to his right. Oddly enough, the other horse seemed also to be sheering away to the left, so that in a few seconds the space between them had widened a good deal. But as soon as it did so, there came two more lions' roars, immediately after one another, one on the right and the other on the left, and the horses began drawing nearer together. So apparently did the lions. The roaring of the brutes on each side was horribly close, and they seemed to be keeping up with the galloping horses quite easily. Then the cloud rolled away. The moonlight, astonishingly bright, showed up everything, almost as if it were broad day. Two horses and two riders were galloping almost neck to neck and knee to knee, just as if they were in a race. Indeed, Bree said afterwards that a finer race had never been seen in Calormen. Shasta now gave himself up for lost and began to wonder whether lions killed you quickly or played with you as a cat plays with a mouse, and how much it would hurt. At the same time, one sometimes does this at the most frightful moments. He noticed everything. He saw that the other rider was a very small, slender person, mail clad, the moon shone on the mail, and riding magnificently. He had no beard. Something flat and shining was spread out before them. Before Shasta had time to even guess what it was, there was a great splash, and he found his mouth half full of salt water. The shining thing had been a long inlet of the sea. Both horses were swimming, and the water was up to Shasta's knee. There was an angry roaring behind them, and looking back, Shasta saw a great, shaggy, and terrible shape crouched on the water's edge, but only one. We must have shaken off the other lion, he thought. The lion apparently did not think its prey worth wetting. At any rate, it made no attempt to take to the water in pursuit. The two horses, side by side, were now well out into the middle of the creek, and the opposite shore could be clearly seen. The Tarkin has not yet spoken a word. But he will, thought Shasta, as soon as we have landed. What am I to say? I must begin thinking out the story. Then suddenly two voices spoke at his side. Oh, I am so tired, said the one. Hold your tongue, Huen, and don't be a fool, said the other. I'm dreaming, thought Shasta. I could have sworn another horse spoke. Soon the horses were no longer swimming, but walking, and soon, with a great sound of water running off their sides and tails, and with a great crunching of pebbles under 8 hoofs, came out on the farther breach of the inlet. The Tarkin, to Shasta's surprise, showed no wish to ask questions. He did not even look at Shasta, but seemed anxious to urge his horse straight on. Bree, however, at once shouldered himself in the other horse's way. "Bruh!" he snorted. "Steady there. I heard you. I did. There's no good pretending, ma'am. I heard you. You're a talking horse, a Narnian horse, just like me." What's it got to do with you, if she is? Said the strange rider fiercely, laying hand on sword hilt. But the voice in which the words were spoken had already told Shasta something. Why, it's only a girl, he exclaimed. And what business is it of yours if I am only a girl? Snapped the stranger. You're only a boy, a rude, common little boy, a slave probably, who's stolen his master's horse. That's all you know, said Shasta. He's not a thief, little Tarkina, said Bree. At least, if there's been any stealing, you might just as well say I stole him. And as for its not being my business, you wouldn't expect me to pass a lady of my own race in this strange country without speaking to her. It's only natural I should. I think it's very natural, too, said the mayor. I wish you held your tongue, Huen, said the girl. Look at the trouble you've got us into. I don't know about trouble, said Shasta. You can clear off as soon as you like. We shan't keep you. No, you shan't, said the girl. What quarrelsome creatures these humans are, said Bree, the mayor. They're as bad as mules. Let's try to talk a little sense. I take it, ma'am, your story is the same as mine. Captured in early youth, years of slavery among the Calormenes?
Too true, sir,
Said the mayor with a melancholy whinny. And now, perhaps, escape?
tell him to mind his own business, Hewin.
Said the girl.
No, I won't, Aravis,
Said the mayor, putting her ears back.
this is my escape just as much as yours, and I'm sure a noble war horse like this is not going to betray us. We're trying to escape, get to Narnia.
And so, of course, are we, said Bree. Of course, you guessed that at once. A little boy in rags riding, or trying to ride, a war horse at dead of night wouldn't mean anything but an escape of some sort. And if I may say so, a high-born Tarkina riding alone at night, dressed up in her brother's armor, and very anxious for everyone to mind their own business and ask her no questions. Well, if that's not fishy, call me a cob.
All right, then, said Aravis. You've guessed it. Owen and I are running away. We are trying to get to Narnia. And now, what about it?
Why, in that case, what is to prevent us all going together? Said Bree. I trust, Madam Howin, you will accept such assistance and protection as I may be able to give you on the journey.
Why do you keep talking to my horse instead of to me?
Asked the girl. Excuse me, Martina, said Bree, with just the slightest backward tilt of his ears. But that's Calormene talk. We're free Narnians, Howin and I suppose if you're running away to Narnia, you want to be one too. In that case, Howin isn't your horse any longer. One might just as well say you're her human. The girl opened her mouth to speak and then stopped. Obviously, she had not quite seen it in that light before.
Still,
She said after a moment's pause.
I don't know that there's so much point in all going together. Aren't we more likely to be noticed?
Less, said Bree, and the mayor said,
Oh, do let. I feel much more comfortable. We're not even certain of the way. I'm sure a great charger like this knows far more than we do. Oh, come on, Bree, said Shasta, and let them go their own way. Can't you see they don't want us? We do,
said Howin.
look here,
Said the girl.
I don't mind going with you, Mr. Warhorse. What about this boy? How do I know he's not a spy? Why don't you say at once that you think I'm not good enough for you?
Said Shasta. Be quiet, Shasta, said Bree. Tarkina's question is quite reasonable. I'll vouch for the boy Tarkina. He's been true to me and a good friend, and he's certainly either a Narnian or an Archenlander.
All right, then, let's go together.
She didn't say anything to Shasta, and it was obvious that she wanted Bree, not him. Splendid, said Bree. And now that we've got the water between us and those dreadful animals, what about you two humans taking off off our saddles and are all having a rest and hearing one another's stories? Both the children unsaddled their horses, and the horses had a little grass, and Aravis produced rather nice things to eat from her saddleback. But Shasta sulked and said no thanks, and that he wasn't hungry, and he tried to put on what he thought very grand and stiff manner. But as a fisherman's hut is not usually a good place for learning grand manners, the result was dreadful. And he half knew that it wasn't a success, and then became sulkier and more awkward than ever. Meanwhile, the two horses were getting on splendidly. They remembered the very same places in Narnia. The grasslands up above Beaver's Dam, and found they were some sort of second cousins once removed. This made things more and more uncomfortable for the humans until at last Bree said, and now, Tarkeen, tell us your story, and don't hurry it. I'm feeling comfortable now.
Arthur immediately began, sitting quite still and using a rather different tone and style from her usual one. For in Calormen, storytelling, whether the stories are true or made up, is a thing you're taught, just as English boys and girls are taught essay writing. The difference is that people want to hear the stories, whereas I never heard of anyone who wanted to read the essays.